I simply want to introduce our preacher today. And I want to do that just because I want to thank him for the model that he has been to me. And there's two things that stand out to me when I think about Pastor Samuel and his influence on me. First is his love for the least, his love for those who are marginalized. In Luke 4, Jesus got up at the very beginning of his ministry, and he read from the prophet Isaiah, and he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." So Jesus' ministry was a ministry for the poor, for the oppressed. And Pastor Samuel has been a voice speaking to me and speaking to our church, I think, just consistently reminding us that the church doesn't exist for itself. The church exists for the sake of others. That the kingdom of God is about reaching out and loving the least and the lost. And so I want to thank him for that. And I also just want to say that he has been a model for me of what it means to age gracefully, meaning age with the power of grace. If I can be in my 80s and as active as he is, I will be one very happy camper. You know, there is a version of retirement in our society that says, hey, you've worked hard, now it's time to just relax and take it easy and let other people do all the work. And when I look at Scripture, I see that God is at work in us and through us throughout our whole lives. And I really think that Pastor Samuel, for me, has modeled what it means to age with a heart for ministry, to receive but also to give in so many ways, even in his 80s. So thank you so much for modeling that for me. Our preacher today, Reverend Samuel Cox.
Thank you. My sermon today is my spiritual autobiography. And looking over the past 83 years, a lot of things stand out. But I was taught in seminary that a sermon should have only three points, a good sermon, and a conclusion. My 3 points today, my first is when I was 19 years old, 1952. I'm calling it my reintroduction to Christianity. And then some years later, 32 years old, as a missionary, social work missionary in Japan, the lowest point in my life. And finally, my last point is looking back and looking forward. And I'll try to do that within, Methodists were taught, don't make too long sermon. So I'll start off. In 1952, the country was in violence. There was riots, lots of racial unrest. And at 19 years old, I looked at the world as being very unjust, and this included the church. So I declared myself an atheist. Even our first Methodist church in downtown Pittsburgh, Kansas, southeast Kansas, was racially divided. It was very polite. The ushers were instructed, if a black person comes, they were politely told, you have a church of your own, and they would be given an address, and they were told to go there. So I was very disillusioned, but I was really angry with the world and wanted to make the world more just. At that age, hitchhiking was very common. So my vacation times, I often hitchhike. And I hitchhike basically around the country. So the summer after my freshman year at the Kansas State Teachers College, I hitchhiked to Washington, D.C. And when I got there, someone said, "Oh, have you heard about this youth camp? They're working down in the black slums, and they're doing good. Why don't you join up with them?" And I did. At this time, Washington, D.C., the black slums, one of the worst slums in the country, within a mile of the Capitol. And it was ran by the Quakers. They usually have 2 or 3 Quakers, and they invited other youth from different religious backgrounds or no religion at all. Okay, that sounded neat, so I did that. Their approach was, we want to help the people, but we don't dare paint the outside of the houses. The slumlords would jack up the rent. So we went inside the houses and helped them clean up and so forth. And then we played with the children in the alleys. And it's rather interesting that small children, they didn't play like most kids. They seemed to cling to you. And we noticed a lot of the kids were sickly, and we very innocently said, why don't we take them to the doctor? Oh, we don't have doctors, and there's a huge hospital nearby. But the hospital was for whites only. We were angry. And then one evening, there was also a Parks and Recreation with a public swimming pool that was gated, fairly close, whites only. Well, one of the kids climbed over the fence at night and drowned. The community was outraged. We were angry also. We wanted to do something about that. This is terrible. This is unjust. And our Quaker leader said, hold on. Okay, it's okay to demonstrate, but you got to be nonviolent. And this is the way you do it. Now, people, when you demonstrate, they'll look at you, they'll come to you and yell obscenities at you. Now, you look them in the eye and you look for God. Okay. So we did a lot of sit-ins and with some of the restaurants in the area, and we'd put signs on our back. I've been waiting here for 1 hour, 2 hours. We were very strategic. We'd aim our demonstration during church services. You know, we went to restaurants nearby the big churches. We knew that after church, many of the people would want to come for lunch. And so we'd purposely occupy the seats. And when they come to service, we'd say, I don't want to order until my black friends can eat. And we'd occupy the restaurant, therefore they lose business. And we'd try to prick the conscience of those who are going to church. Okay, that summer, and when it ended, I went back to my college for my second year, and I helped organize a skeptics club. And we wanted to change things. And one of the things we noticed there is it was a suitcase college, Kansas State Teachers College. That meant the weekends, the cafeteria shut down. Okay, there was a problem with the black students, mostly from Kansas City. I had no place to eat. And so we took it upon ourselves to go approach the small restaurants around the college. I still remember going alone, 19 years old, to this restaurant owner. And I stuttered. Would you let my black friends eat here. And I recall the black restaurant owner come to me, big man, his face turned beet red. He put his face in mine, and he said, if anything I hate worse than niggers, it's nigger lovers like you. Oh gosh, that scared me. I tried to look in his eyes. Where was God? And then we tried to be a little strategic. We noticed that the Wesley Foundation was pretty big there at the campus. And we decided maybe we can go co-opt the Wesley Foundation and get them to support us. So our Skeptics Club went to the Wesley Foundation that evening, and we presented, you know, we have a problem here. Black students here don't have a place to eat on the weekends. And I was surprised, you know. They agreed, yes, let's do something about it. Why don't we start our own restaurant here at Wesley Foundation? Every weekend we'll serve our own food here. And they did. And 50% of the Wesley Foundation became black. So, hey, that was neat. That same evening, they had elections for officers, and someone said, I nominate Sam Cox to be first vice president. I said, you can't do that. I'm an atheist. The director said, that's okay. We Methodists love atheists. So I became the first vice president of the Wesley Foundation. At some point, someone said, why don't we integrate the First Methodist Church downtown? Okay, sounded like a good idea. So the entire Wesley Foundation, half of us black, went to the First Methodist Church, and we integrated the First Methodist Church. Some years later, I went back to that church, and I looked in the audience, and I saw several interracial couples. I said, we were told that would never happen in our lifetime. So things do change. And I kept remembering the advice of our Quaker leader, look for God in every situation. And that became my motto for my life. Also during Bible study at the Wesley, we studied 1 Corinthians 13. Okay, that is how I became a Methodist. And our director was Dr. T. William Hall. He became my mentor and eventually led me to the ministry. I recall he also organized a Religious Emphasis Week, was a big thing in those days. We bring great famous preachers to the campus. And T. William Hall said, Sam, would you help me with Religious Emphasis Week? I said, you can't. I'm an atheist. He said, that's okay. He said, I'd like for you to organize a skeptics hour for all the atheists. I said, okay. So we had a room full and I was the first to stand up, and I said, Dr. Hall, I don't believe in hell. And he said, neither do I. Another reason I became a Methodist. After the second year, I decided I really didn't care for college, so I volunteered for the draft. It was the end of the Korean War. So I was sent to Japan. And eventually, well, in Japan, we had a international work camp that was posted in one of the little churches, which I was teaching English Bible class, of all things. And I attended that work camp, and I was given time off from the Army. They said, okay, that's good public relation. And it was an international work camp sponsored by the World Council of Churches. The theme song was "This Is My Song." And I was in several other work camps after that, including one in Hiroshima. This became the theme song, and it stayed with me also, the opening song today. Eventually, I got my ordination at Isla School of Theology, thanks to T. William Hall, who was my mentor. And I went to School of Social Work, and then I was commissioned to be a missionary to Japan. So my wife and I at that time, we were social work missionaries. And in the last year of our ministry there, I encountered the lowest point in my life. And this is a letter I sent back to our church supporters, January 1965, our dear Sydney. Sydney, our rambunctious second son, who loved to run and jump and could climb almost any tree, died last week. Next month, he would have reached his 5th birthday. The doctors told us 6 months ago that Sydney had acute leukemia, had only a short while to live. It's hard to believe he had an incurable disease. The only visible symptom was an afternoon fever. For 2 weeks, he attended his Japanese kindergarten class, for which he had waited so eagerly. With Sydney, the disease worked fast. Within the month, his legs were bent in a painful deformity. He was never to walk again. Our feeling in the beginning was that of utter helplessness. Slowly, the body, which had been so strong and well, became weak and thin. The time and attention for his care increased. His body became racked with pain in the joints of his legs, arms, and back. Near the end, Sydney's gums became so swollen he could not close his mouth, and his head became deformed. Drugs and ice packs were only temporary relief. We took turns staying awake at night. Periodically, it was necessary to take him to the hospital for blood transfusion. So many we cannot remember. These were lonely times for Sydney, and he was always wanting to come home. We felt caught between the excruciating pain and the separation he experienced. These months were not beautiful for us. The anticipated grief, lack of sleep, and tiredness. We cannot easily rationalize the pain of our little Sydney, nor the deep sense of hurt and emptiness. I don't know the meaning of his brief life. There's so much about life and death that is mystery. But we know that Sydney's loss is not ours alone. His life touched many others. We've never felt closer to friends far and near. Japanese workers in the area of our social work responded generously with donations of blood, along with American friends and even one of the hospital nurses. They opened their hearts to us and shared experiences of tragedy unknown to us. At this moment of reflection, it seems to me that the most basic human quality that runs through all people of every nation is a feeling of pain and the experience of tragedy. Maybe sometimes this can be a unifying force, and perhaps love can grow and be nourished even in the midst of this. In the most profound sense, maybe this is the God of love as we've come to know it. The memorial service for Sydney was held in the beautiful new chapel at Aoyama Gakuen School. It was primarily a children's service, and our scripture was 1 Corinthians 13. At this time in my life, my Bishop Phillips of the Rocky Mountain Conference provided some grief counseling for me. And he said, "Samuel, I predict there will always be children in your life." And later, as I look back, that prophecy did occur. Fast forward, in 1965, we retired from the mission board and we relocated to Hawaii. Spent 9 years with Moilele Community Center and helped start one of the first after-school programs for more than 300 children. And then 9 years later, had the opportunity to help start Halakipa for runaway kids. As I recall, God was working in my life at all of these times. I recall as we started Halakipa, and much of the idea came from Captain Roland Sagum, who was with the police department. He was the lay leader at Aldersgate Methodist Church. And he said, "You know, downtown Honolulu, we have many runaway girls who were teenagers and were prostitutes. We need a shelter for these kids." That gave us our start. In the early days, also as we started out, I had the opportunity to meet Steve Jobs, who was not famous at that time. I got this call from Steve Jobs. His idea is we need to have a national runaway hotline. And he offered 5 computers, our first computers, and all expenses paid to go to Cupertino. And there we met Steve Jobs. And at that time, I was rather surprised. I never met him before. He came out in a T-shirt and sloppy jeans. He looked like one of our runaway kids, really. But his vision inspired me. And he said, "Someday, every village in the world will have computers. And when we have that, we'll be able to have an information exchange that no dictator can suppress." I had the opportunity to travel in China, in India, Africa. Today, every little village has an internet cafe, and you can communicate. They have computers there, and that's amazing. We hear a lot about China is suppressing the internet. Okay, I just talked to my grandson who's in the audience, and he's studying at Washington University. He said he has several classmates from China. He said, "Oh, no big thing. Any of us can get around their firewall." So information exchange is present around the world. In 1998, it was time for my retirement. Social Security kicks in at 65. At that point, most people retire. So I retired. Halakipa was still in good hands. And a few years after that, Tom Choi approached me and said, "Well, you have free time now. Would you be interested in being a part-time visitation pastor here?" And you know, that was a godsend for me. Now, I'd worked with children all my life. One thing missing from my life was working for those at the other end of our age spectrum, the senior citizen, those in hospice. And that has been a true blessing for me, working with you. As I look over the audience today, I remember over the 15 years that so many of the loved ones all of us have had that's passed away, but there are saints with us. Some of those saints worked with me. I recall Kay Wiest, who trained me to be a visitation pastor. I recall, okay, I'll be a visitation pastor. And I recall working with Kay Wiest. We went to Aloha Care, and there they have a lot of people with dementia, including one of our family church members who was also knew Japanese as a first language. But she had dementia and could not even recognize her own family. So I visited her and I said, well, I'll lose a little Japanese. I said, Michiko, anata wa daijoubu desu ka? Watashi wa bokushi desu. And she looked at me wild-eyed and she screamed. It sort of scared me. And Kay said, Pastor, this is the way you do it. She put my hand and put her Michiko's hand, and she said, Michiko, this is your pastor. He wants to offer you a prayer. And that was my first training. And it doesn't work with all cases, I'm told by Sue Pignataro, but it worked in that situation. I recall Marge Kuba with the healing touch, and we often teamed up together, and she had this thing of healing touch, just going over the sick part, and then I would offer the prayer. And we went out to the hospice also. I recall one time going to the hospice ward at Kuikini, and I saw this lady in the back. She had the most lovely smile. And I went up to her and I said, you have the most lovely smile. And she said, Pastor, that's because you're smiling at me. You know, that made my day. And, you know, working with those in hospice was very uplifting for me. And it really, invariably, as you talk to those who are dying, they say, what's the most important thing in your life? And they say, invariably, it's your family and it's your friends. And that was a great lesson for me. And I see many, I think of Nini Leary, and I think of many others that I had the experience of being blessed. Also, Sue Pignataro with Project Donna. 3 years ago, we had the opportunity to open up the Beacon of Hope House. Very grateful for the support of this church and several other wonderful volunteers. Selma Wishi, John and Courtney Davis, Bob Reese. This last week we had a Christmas party for the ladies there and also those who returned, probably about 15 or so. But we also had 15 guests from the prison, from the Bridge program. And it was a wonderful fellowship, and I know our pastor's wife, Cindy, was there, and several other volunteers. So I see God working in many, many areas. Sometime we say, the young people are not coming to church. Where are they going? But my experience with young people is they may be more spiritual than our generation. More young people are volunteering today. They're reading more spiritual novels. They're engaged in meditation, yoga, and so forth. A few years ago, had the opportunity to travel to the Baltic countries. And the Baltic countries suffered terribly during World War II and also under the Soviet occupation. Downtown capital, Vilnius, Lithuania, there's a building there with a cross, a flaming cross. And I said, wow, Methodists are over here. And I got an earful of the history of the Methodist Church in Lithuania. You know, the Methodist pastors they had two Holocausts, one under the Germans and one under the Soviet oppression. And many Methodist pastors were actually executed. So they have a museum there. It's a double museum. And while we were there at the museum, a large group of German students came, and in the European Union, they have no borders now. They can go across each other. But the German students, they circled the entire Holocaust Museum. And guess which song they sang in German? It was our opening song, the song, "This is my song, the song of all nations, a song of peace." So I have a lot of faith, and I see God working among our young people. I see my motto now, okay, if you see somebody coming at you, look the person in the eyes and say, "Where is God?" and look for God. My idea now is look for God in every situation, including our church. We had the opportunity at this last annual conference to visit my old mentor, Dr. T. William Hall, and I know my colleague from Isla School knows him too. He became a professor of religion and philosophy at the University of Denver. And he is now with his wife of 73 years marriage. Can you believe it? And they're both in their 90s. And we had a chance to visit him in Davis. We attended church with him. And the church was vigorous and alive with lots of young people. They had a peace pole out front with a rainbow ribbon. And I thought it was wonderful. I had a chance to chat with him, and he said, "Samuel, I've done everything in my life I want to do." And I think that's partially true with Babs and I now, as everything comes to an end at one point. I think our role now will be more, I think we're saying we're not going to be so much doers as encouragers. The Methodist Church has a role for us retired ministers, and it's called elder pastor. It means we're available for consultation. If a young pastor doesn't want to talk to his bishop, he can talk to an elder pastor. So we plan to be elder pastors and help out the young people. And thank you very much for all your support. And I see God working very much in this church. Thank you.